With Lululemon, the real gift happens when they're living in it. When you give the fan favorite everywhere belt bag, the real gift is... And when the ultra-soothing Rest Feel slides are the gift, you're really giving them... This holiday, Lululemon makes it easy to give little luxuries that go beyond. Open the moment. Shop now at Lululemon.com.
His code name's Jackal. He's an exceptional assassin.
Streaming now on Peacock.
He will kill again, unless we stop him.
Academy Award winner Eddie Redmayne.
You're paying me to kill him. I am charging you for getting away.
The Jackal's here. Look at the exits.
BAFTA Award winner Lashana Lynch.
I will find him, and I will kill him myself. I like to win.
So do I.
The Day of the Jackal. Streaming now, only on Peacock.
Welcome to the 9th fiction in our 15 Fictions for Summer series. Today, I'm talking about another play, perhaps the great anti-war play of the 20th century, Bertolt Brecht's Mother Courage and Her Children. Brecht wrote Mother Courage and Her Children in late 1939, just after the Nazi invasion of Poland, so right at the beginning of what was going to become, and most people at the time probably sensed was going to become, the Second World War. He wrote it, he said, in a burst of white-hot rage. He was furious. But part of Brecht's philosophy as a playwright and as a political thinker was that anger is essentially unproductive if you can't achieve some distance from it. Anger burns you out. Anger is just raw emotion. What's needed is something to channel it, to funnel it towards understanding. And one of the ways to achieve that as a playwright was to create distance in time. So Mother Courage and Her Children is a play about war written at the start of a truly terrible war. And it is essentially about the war to come. But it is set 300 years earlier, not 30 years earlier, but 300 years earlier. During the 30 Years' War, the war that raged in Europe from 1618 to 1648, and was the worst war ever experienced on the European continent until the war that was starting in 1939. The 30 Years' War was a nightmare and a bloodbath. It was genocidal. There are thought to be some parts of Europe, some communities in Germany, though Germany wasn't a coherent country at this time, but in the place that we call Germany, where the population fell by 50%. Half of everybody died during that war. The Second World War, the war to come, was in many ways very, very different, and Brecht would have understood that it was going to be a very different kind of war from the 30 Years' War. Whatever was going to happen after 1939 was going to happen on an industrial scale. 17th century Europe was pre-industrial Europe. It was peasant Europe. The killing was hand-to-hand killing. It was face-to-face killing. And a lot of the dying happened because of famine and disease. The Second World War at least threatened something different, industrial slaughter, and indeed that's what it delivered, the industrial slaughter of the Holocaust. A war that was going to end with the use of nuclear weapons can't be compared to the 30 Years' War. And yet, in various respects, the two wars are parallel. They do allow a playwright to tell a similar story. There have never been two wars like them because of the scale of the destruction. The Second World War destroyed, as the 30 Years' War had done, entire communities. And the toll that it took was primarily, as with the 30 Years' War, on civilians. So the First World War, the war that had happened nearly 30 years earlier, was a terrible war, the most appalling thing to experience, particularly if you were a soldier. But this is all relative. But relatively speaking, civilians did not bear the brunt of it. In the 30 Years' War, most of the dying was done by civilians. In the Second World War, in certain parts of Europe, particularly the parts of Europe that got caught between the great power struggle, the contests of the superpowers, the brutal superpowers, in parts of Central and Eastern Europe that got caught between Nazism and Stalinism, entire communities were wiped out. Whole civilian populations were destroyed before the genocidal madness of the Holocaust. even before that, whole populations were destroyed by being caught in the middle of this war. And the 30 Years' War is the only comparable war to that. The 30 Years' War was a doctrinal war. It was a religious war. It was a war about everything. But it was a religious war. It was a war that came out of the conflict between Catholicism and various forms of Protestantism. The Second World War was also a doctrinal war in a sense. It was an ideological rather than religious war. The great destructive contest, the contest that destroyed parts of Europe, was between fascism and communism. But as Brecht understood, these doctrines were in many ways empty. They were fake, as in the 30 Years' War. They were interchangeable. They were the masks that people wore in order to present themselves to the world, but in the end, what lay behind them was just violence. In late 1939, when the Nazis invaded Poland, Nazi Germany and Soviet Russia, Stalin's Russia, had just signed a pact, the Nazi-Soviet Pact, which made a mockery of everything. And Brecht was a communist. So he was committed now, having believed that the Nazis were his sworn enemies, to the new line, which was the communists and the Nazis could work together against their enemies. And their enemies were going to include countries like Poland, which would be swallowed up. Brecht was committed to a line that he knew was nonsense. He was committed to a line that made a mockery of the things that he was meant to believe in. And the 30 Years' War was that kind of war too. It made a mockery of people's beliefs. It made a mockery of faith. It made a mockery of doctrinal difference because people switch sides. They switch sides for all sorts of reasons, for reasons of survival, for reasons of convenience. The thing that was lost in the mix was any confident belief that the underlying faith meant anything. The 30 Years' War was the war that the English philosopher Thomas Hobbes, who wrote just after it ended in his book Leviathan, described as the war of all against all. That was the war that he was thinking of, his celebrated description of the state of nature, in which in the end everything breaks down and everyone fights everyone and life is cheap and nothing can be relied on. The war of all against all. That was the 30 Years' War. It was an anarchy. That's how he understood it. And though he hadn't lived through it personally, Hobbes, he knew enough of what was happening in Europe to know just how horrific it was. But I think people misunderstand it. They think that when someone like Hobbes, a philosopher like Hobbes, talks about this as the war of all against all, as an anarchy, it means it was a kind of free-for-all in which everything collapsed, everything broke down. There were no rules. It was just banditry. It was just kind of criminality writ across all parts of human life. Anything went in this war. And that's not true, and that's not what Hobbes meant by the war of all against all. War is not a time when there are no rules, there are no laws. To live through a war, particularly as a civilian, as a soldier too, but also as a civilian, is to be subject to all sorts of rules and laws and demands and requirements. It's almost nothing but people telling you what to do. Life is an endless series of people saying, do this or else. And the do this is often framed as a law or a code, a religious doctrine, an ideological doctrine. This is what we do. This is what we believe in. This is who we are. People in war, their whole lives are consumed by other people telling them what to do. This is not an anarchy in the sense that it's a free-for-all. Most people feel the opposite of free. They feel constrained and trapped by all of the demands that are being made on them. What makes it anarchic is that none of the rules, none of the laws ultimately can be relied on. They break down. The people who are telling you what to do, the people who are commanding you, insisting that you do this or do that, you can't be sure that they're going to be the people who will be capable of commanding you next week or next month or next year. Are they going to win? Are they going to lose? Are these the people who will be occupying this town in 2 years' time? If we do what these people say, what will their enemies do if they become the people who can tell us what to do? The chaos here is the chaos not of there being no rules, but of there being too many rules and too many people trying to make the rules, often backed up by threats of extreme force. And never being able to trust that to obey these rules is to find security. The thing that is missing is not rule or law, but trust in rule or law. That's what's absent. And to live through such a time is to find yourself having to decide whether you can trust anybody. And in this world, there will be endless attempts to create little versions of political security, to create small communities in which people feel there is something that they can rely on. People will choose to attach themselves to this army or to that army, to these people or to that people. They will pick a religion. Maybe they will swap sides and pick another religion. People will endlessly be looking for security, and the security will be presented to them as such, and it will vanish. And that's the horror. There is something predictably unpredictable about this kind of war. You can be sure that whatever it is you believe you can rely on today may not be there tomorrow. It is predictably unpredictable, and it is also unpredictably predictable in the sense that the things that need to be secure from 1 week or 1 month or 1 year to the next, you can't rely on them. And that's the world that Brecht is trying to describe in Mother Courage. That's why this play is set in the 30 Years' War. It is a version of war in which there are too many people making the rules. There are too many things that you have to try and take account of in order to survive, and none of them are reliable. That is Mother Courage's world. She is a character who lives, exists to survive, and she survives by selling things. So Mother Courage has a cart that in the play is always with her, on which she has a range of goods, of wares that she sells, cloth and other things. And she does what she needs to do to survive. That's who she is. She is a civilian. She's a civilian in war, so she needs to survive by doing whatever it is that the war requires for survival. And she is always on the lookout for the sign of what it is that she needs to do. What can she sell and to whom can she sell reliably? Where can she get the best price? One of the things that you want to know in wartime is whether money is worth what you think it's worth. And if it is, who's backing it up? Whose security can you rely on? These are survival strategies. And Mother Courage is nothing but someone who lives for and through survival strategies. And in this war, which is seemingly never ending, so this is set in the middle of this war and sort of in the middle of Europe, the scene moves around in different parts of what we would call Germany and Bavaria. It moves at various points into Poland. It's in that middle ground that Brecht was thinking about in 1939. And when Brecht wrote this play, he was in exile in Sweden. He was on an island in Sweden. He was in exile, self-imposed exile from Germany. During the course of the Second World War, he would ultimately move to the United States. But when he wrote it, he was in Sweden. Sweden is not central to the story of the Second World War. Sweden remained neutral during the Second World War. And Brecht wrote this at some remove from the horror. In Mother Courage, in the 30 Years' War, Sweden is actually one of the major powers. This is one of the differences between the two wars. Sweden, in the first half of the 17th century, was one of the superpowers of Europe. And indeed, the fate of the Swedish army, of the Swedish king, plays a part in Mother Courage's choices about where she should be and which army she should ally herself to. But it doesn't really matter where it is. It is in the middle of Europe, in the middle of a war, and a war that seems to have no end. At various points in the play, peace breaks out, but peace never lasts. At various points in the play, war is resumed, but that phase of the war never lasts. The play is incredibly episodic. It's written deliberately to be episodic, takes place in 12 scenes. These scenes each happen at a particular time and in a particular place, but they are their own thing. Each scene is its own moment because there is no continuity in this kind of war. There is no way of knowing from one scene to the next which side you should be on. And because of this, Mother Courage has a kind of code. She has a personal code, a way of being in the world, in this world, which is that she needs to do what she has to do to survive. And that means because this is a war, she needs, as she puts it, to feed the war. The war makes demands of her, and she needs to meet those demands because by meeting those demands, she can make a living. And making a living here means achieve the means to live, to survive. So she does what the war asks of her. But what the war asks of her keeps changing. That's the horror of it. You can never be sure what it will ask of you. And so as a result, she has a way of being in the world, a way of thinking about the world that is deeply cynical, deeply and understandably cynical. She doesn't think that you can really trust anyone. She has learned that you trust these people today, and tomorrow you need someone else to protect you from the people that you trusted yesterday. She has a kind of personal philosophy, which is Don't try and be a hero. Never did anyone any good. Don't try and be a soldier. Don't try and be a hero. Don't think you can get on top of this thing. Don't believe what you're told. Keep your head down. Basically, mistrust everyone and everything and always get the best deal you can. Each situation is its own bargaining moment. You get the best deal you can by not thinking that there is some continuity here. Maybe a good deed today will be rewarded tomorrow. Today is today. And the best you can do today is not do a good deed, but strike a good bargain. That is Mother Courage's world. And that is her outlook on this world. And it is designed to be hard to relate to. It is alienating. And one of the reasons that it's alienating is there is no opportunity over the course of this play for someone who lives like that. Whatever you think about her, and she's funny, she's cynical and funny, she's mocking, including very mocking about men and the things that men demand of women in war. She's funny, she's hard as nails, but she doesn't change. She doesn't develop. Different things happen to her. Lots of different things happen to her. She finds herself in very, very different kinds of situations. But the basic situation doesn't change. And that's what Brecht wants his audience to think about when they watch this play. That's what he wants them to think about war. However angry or despairing war might make them feel, they are to remember when they look at the plight of a particular person or a particular character that there is no opportunity for personal development under these circumstances. There is no way of telling a morality tale about a war like this, because a morality tale depends on there being some kind of continuity from past through present to future, so that the story as it develops has a payoff which makes sense in terms of the different stages that it passes through. But you can't do that during the 30 Years' War, because the different stages are their own thing. And Mother Courage knows that. She understands it. She lives it. She lives it through the play. And so in each of these situations, what we are being asked to see as an audience is that the situation is all. But it's difficult because we want more than that from plays, novels, including anti-war plays, anti-war novels. In a sense, we want them to be morality tales. And I think one of the things that Brecht is doing, one of the kinds of distance that he's hoping to create here, particularly by setting this play 300 years before the time that he's really writing about, is to try and remind his audience that the distance they feel from this story is because in the end, the story can't cohere. The point of the story of Mother Courage is that it can't be a single story. And that means it can't be the thing that we want from war. So one of the human impulses when dealing with war, encountering it from the inside or from the outside, it's so horrific, it's so nightmarish, is that we want to try and tell a story about it that allows us to believe that it makes sense in human terms. Now, it could be a grand ideological tale of heroes and villains, the good side, the bad side, our side, their side. There is that kind of story you can tell about a war. By, I think, the time of the Second World War, the experience of the First World War had done enough to persuade quite a lot of people that those stories were bogus. So there was a lot of anti-war literature that came out of the First World War, the horror of the First World War, the mindless slaughter, industrial slaughter of the First World War, that persuaded not everyone. There were still people who believed in the old stories. There were still people who believed that there is nothing more glorious than dying for your country. But some of the art that came out of the First World War, including some of the anti-war poetry, had persuaded enough people that those stories weren't true. Those stories were ridiculous. And those stories were replaced with anti-war stories, the great anti-war stories that came out of the First World War, like All Quiet on the Western Front, or the great anti-war poetry of poets like Wilfred Owen, which exposed the ridiculousness of the stories that people told about the war. But they exposed them by replacing them with other kinds of tales, even in the poetry of Wilfred Owen, other kinds of stories, the stories that reveal the lie. What Brecht is doing is saying something, I think, much more shocking and radical than that, about a war which was worse than the First World War, a war which actually was the only war that could conceivably be considered historically equivalent to the war that was starting in 1939, which is there are no stories to be told at all. That is, there are only a series of stories, each located in a situation, but you can't get them to cohere. They will not cohere because war destroys the possibility of coherence. Mother Courage doesn't change. She doesn't develop. She doesn't learn. The thing that's almost hardest about this play to read or to watch is that Mother Courage doesn't learn. Part of the reason she doesn't learn is she doesn't want to learn. And the reason she doesn't want to learn is she knows that learning is no good for you. It's no good thinking, I will take the lesson of what's just happened to me. I will take the lesson that these people ripped me off, or that deal actually was self-defeating, or I found someone I can trust, or it would have been better for me if I'd kept my mouth shut. There is no lesson to learn because you cannot rely on the fact that that lesson will still hold next time. You've got to work it out each time, which means the only thing you can do is be cynical and assume that nothing you thought was true is going to be true again. To assume that it will be true again is simply to fall into the trap of thinking that you can tell a story in this kind of war that will cohere. So Brecht gives his audience a character who knows that it can't cohere. And then out of that, we see 12 scenes in the life of such a woman. She doesn't develop. She doesn't learn. She gets, you could say, sadder for reasons I'll talk about, for the obvious reasons. Things go worse and worse for her. If anything, she gets more silent. It's not that she learns the lesson to keep her mouth shut, because she already knew that lesson. You keep your mouth shut when it makes sense to keep your mouth shut, except for the times when it makes sense to speak up. But she swallows the things that she wants to say. The emotion rises in the play. The horror rises in the play. But Mother Courage hasn't got anything to say about it because there is nothing to say. To say something about the rising emotion would imply that what's rising here is a sense that this has a meaning, that there is some way of understanding this which will allow us to see what the real story is. There is no story here. This is narrative anarchy. The 12 parts do not cohere into a whole. And no one in this play changes. And no one in this play learns. Or rather, they change all the time. So people are always swapping roles, swapping costumes. In the most literal sense, Mother Courage has a traveling companion in this play who is a chaplain, a Protestant chaplain. But then when the Catholics are on top, they have to change sides and they have to pretend to be Catholics. And then when the Catholics are on retreat, they can change sides again and they can pretend to be Protestants. Does the chaplain learn anything from this? No. The chaplain learns that it makes sense never to pin down who you are. Her other traveling companion, in a sense, in this play is someone who is known as the cook. He is pretty much as cynical as she is, but he seems to form a kind of attachment to Mother Courage. And one of the things that Mother Courage is on the lookout for is a man that she can rely on, because she knows to have a man you can rely on in wartime is a sort of security. It is a way of at least guarding off the worst that could happen until that man lets you down. But she's not going to rely on the cook, because the cook is no more reliable than anyone else. Do they become closer in the course of the play? Well, they go through experiences together that you would think would bring human beings closer together, but they don't get any closer because she can't rely on him any more than she can rely on anyone else. Does the cook change his ways? Does he learn his lesson? Does he become a better person? No. He's the cook. He's the man who can't be relied on. If only he was even reliable in that sense. It's predictably unpredictable and unpredictably predictable. So even the people who are predictably bad, you can't be completely sure they won't one day prove to be your salvation. It's that bad that you don't even know who it is you should run a mile from. So she sticks around with the cook. No one can trust anyone. And if no one can trust anyone, as Hobbes knew, as Brecht knew, no one's character can develop. And yet Mother Courage does have something that coheres for her throughout this play. There is something that drives her consistently through all of the 12 scenes. There is some part of her which is ostensibly, at least, but only ostensibly, non-negotiable. And that is her children. This play is not just about Mother Courage. It is Mother Courage and her children. And she has 3 children. And she sees her job, as well as keeping herself alive in these terrible times, to keep them alive. She has to preserve her children. And her view, her worldview is that is best done by reminding them of the world that they live in. One in which it does not make sense to try and be a hero, in which you should keep your head down, keep out of trouble until trouble finds you, and then when trouble finds you, do whatever you can to get out of it. Don't believe there is any code that will rescue you. Don't believe there is any group of people that you can rely on. Fight your corner and do what you can to escape, but never commit yourself in this war to a situation that you can't escape from. That's her parenting philosophy.
This episode is brought to you by Skinny Pop Popcorn. Perfectly popped, endlessly delicious. Oh, so light and crunchy. Skinny Pop Original Popcorn is the snack you've been searching for. Made with just 3 simple ingredients: popcorn kernels, sunflower oil, and salt. Snacking never felt or tasted so good. Perfectly popped, endlessly delicious. Give yourself permission to snack and pick up Skinny Pop Original Popcorn today.
Each of her 3 children represents a kind of, it's not really a virtue, but a human characteristic which in certain circumstances would be considered a virtue. So each of her children, and these aren't really fully fleshed out characters, and these characters also don't change and don't evolve, but each of them has a characteristic which distinguishes them. She has 2 sons and a daughter. Her daughter is called Catherine, and she is silent. She is mute. She cannot speak, so she is unable really to draw attention to herself. And that, on one level, makes her very vulnerable. But in another set of circumstances, that might be understood to be, if not a virtue, then at least a benefit, because if part of the survival strategy here is to keep your head down, it helps not to be able to say anything. That is a defense. You're less likely to get into trouble by saying the wrong thing if you can't say anything at all. Mother Courage is also aware that her daughter is incredibly vulnerable as a silent woman among soldiers, or in a world in which Mother Courage has to sell her goods to whoever will buy them, and that will often mean selling them to soldiers. But the silent girl has a quality which sometimes might be her salvation. In the end, it's not. She has 2 sons. Eilif, the older son, his quality is that he is headstrong. He wants to be a soldier. He could be described, and he is described by 1 or 2 other people in the play, as brave. He is willing to do the soldierly thing. What is the soldierly thing? The soldierly thing is to kill, both to kill and to risk being killed. He is that kind of man, or that kind of boy, because he's really a child. Mother Courage does not approve of that characteristic in her son at all. She tries to keep him out of being enlisted, being conscripted, being signed up for the war, but she can't. The play begins with him being taken off to the war. She can't keep him out of the war, but he's brave. He's well suited to being a soldier. And in certain circumstances, that should keep him alive. If this is a war, the good soldiers, in the sense of the soldiers who are good at soldiering, should be better off than the people for whom soldiering is, for whatever reason, almost an impossibility. This characteristic could be not a virtue, but a salvation in time of war. But it isn't, because nothing is fixed. There is no characteristic that will save you in a war like this, because anything that looks like it's good in one situation will be bad in another. And then the 3rd child, the younger son, who is called Schweizekäse, and in the English translations, that is usually given as Swiss cheese. Let's call him Swiss cheese. His characteristic is that he is a kind of timid child. He's not like his brother. He wants to do the right thing. You could describe him as honest. He seems to have an honest streak in him. Again, this terrifies Mother Courage. Honesty in war is not going to be your friend. It makes you vulnerable. It makes you exposed to all of the dishonest people that you're going to have to do business with. Honesty is definitely not the best policy. But there are circumstances in which an honest person might well find themselves able to offer something in a war. There will always occasionally be need for someone who can be relied on, someone that you can trust the money to, for instance. Even in war, someone's got to be reliable where money is concerned, or money will lose all value. So in each case, each of her children has a quality which, given the wind blowing in the right direction, could be their salvation. And in each case, it kills them. The thing that could save them is the thing that kills them. And more than that, in each case, Mother Courage is implicated in the deaths of her children. All three die over the course of the play. And in each death, Mother Courage is involved either by an act of commission or by an act of omission. The first to die is the youngest, Swiss Cheese. He gets caught up in the war by being given a money chest to look after, to be responsible for, and he tries to be responsible for it, and he hides it. And in hiding it, he gets caught up by the people who want him to reveal its whereabouts. And he's threatened with court-martial and execution, and he's accused of having stolen it. His desire to more or less do the right thing is his undoing. In a war, there is no protection in trying to do the right thing. Mother Courage tries to save her son. She is aware that he is being held by people, and she does what she would always do when under threat, which is to try and bargain. There must be a price on her son's life. And so she sends a message to the people who are holding him that she wants to buy his release, his salvation. How much should she offer? Everything is a bargain for her. Everything has to be understood as a bargain for her. So how much should she offer? Well, if she gives everything that she has, in a way, it becomes a self-defeating act. She could rescue her child and find herself destitute and not just at the mercy of the war, but possibly at risk of starvation. Mass starvation was a risk throughout the 30 Years' War. So she's got to find a price. She believes there is a price for everything, and each situation is different. She offers 120 guilder. She thinks if she offers 200 guilder, which is everything she has, if she offers all of it, all of her possessions, whatever she achieves will be self-defeating. But it's not enough, so she offers 150. It's not enough. So in the end, she does offer it all. She bargains for her son's life. And in the end, she realizes that she can't drive a hard bargain. She has to offer everything that she has. But by that point, it's too late. And he is killed. She can't buy his release. And it's horrible to watch because it looks petty. She's bargaining with her child's life, and she's calculating all the time, what is this life not worth, but under what circumstances is this salvation sustainable? What would make this deal one that we could live with, not live with in our consciences, but live with in our bellies, that we could live with and through? It's unbearable to watch it. And when it results in the death of her child, she doesn't draw a moral from it. There is no moral to be drawn. You might think the moral of that story is don't bargain for the life of your child. Or the moral of that story is offer everything you can up front. Don't go through a series of negotiations. Don't grade this. Don't grade the life of your child. Just throw everything at it. But she doesn't conclude any of those things. She doesn't conclude anything. She simply moves on to the next scene. The second of her children to die in sequence, though not in her own knowledge of this, is her other son, Eilif. So she hears news of him that he has become a war hero because he is a good soldier, and one of the things he's good at is killing. And this is a war in which marauding armies pass through communities and they kill farmers to steal their food. And they threaten people with burning their houses down. They do terrible things. And that counts as being a kind of war hero. You're keeping your side alive. You're finding food for your people. And Eilif turns out to be good at that. He's good at killing and threatening killing in order to extract what's needed to keep the army on the move. And for that, he is rewarded. He is treated as a loyal and reliable soldier. He is described as a hero for killing people. And then there is a brief outbreak of peace. And he's not the brightest, and he hasn't realized that the situation has completely changed. And under circumstances of peace, if he carries on behaving like that, by killing and threatening to kill in order to extract food or goods from people. He goes from being a hero to being a criminal. So when he does it again, but this time under circumstances of peace, he is arrested and he is charged and he is executed. The thing that made him a hero is the thing that kills him. Where is Mother Courage in this story? What does this story do to Mother Courage? The answer is she is nowhere, and it does nothing to her. She is nowhere because when news comes that Eilif is condemned to death and she has a chance to see him and to say goodbye, no one believes that she can save him. She is away. Where is she? She is off selling her goods. She's back in the marketplace. She's always in the marketplace. She's always on the lookout for somewhere that she can make a living. So she is off selling. She's not bargaining for her child's life because she doesn't even know that her child is about to be executed. And by the time she comes back from the marketplace, he's already dead. And she never discovers that he's dead. And even at the end of the play, we know, the audience know, that the second of her 3 children is now dead, but she never finds that out. It doesn't do anything to her because Brecht never allows her even to discover this. She was just absent. She was absent at the moment when one of her 2 surviving children came to say goodbye. And then the third death, which is the most harrowing of all and the one that takes place on stage, is the death of Katrine. So Katrine is mute. And she lives with her mother. She lives like her mother in and with the cart. And the cart is at the center of the action. And Katrine is often on top of the cart or inside the cart, hiding in the cart or perched on top of the cart. She cannot speak. She witnesses what goes on around her. She sees what's happening to her brothers, but she can't do anything. And Mother Courage wants to protect her. Mother Courage doesn't know at the end of the play that she's trying to protect her only surviving child. She thinks she still has 2 left. But we, the audience, know this is her only surviving child. The peace has ended. The war has resumed again. People have switched sides. The Catholics are on the march. They're trying to take a Protestant town. Mother Courage and her daughter are holed up with some peasants. Catholic soldiers come and threaten the peasants. They want information about the town so that they can attack the town secretly, stealthily, and, we have to believe, kill its inhabitants. Its inhabitants include people who are relatives of the peasants. The peasants don't know what to do. There is nothing they can do. These are intolerable situations. There is no good response here. There is no right thing or wrong thing to do here. It is intolerable. Katrine witnesses all of this, and she witnesses the imminent betrayal of the town. And she does the only thing that she can do. She suddenly decides that she must alert the town to its impending fate, but she can't speak. She can't communicate. So she communicates the only way that's possible for her, which is that she bangs a drum. And on stage, towards the end of the play, she gets on top of the cart, she gets on top of the roof of the house, and she bangs her drum to warn the town of what's coming. And she successfully warns the town of what's coming. She saves them. And because she's there visibly banging the drum, she's killed. She's shot and killed. There is no hiding place for the girl banging the drum. The girl who had as her one saving grace the fact that she couldn't be heard dies making a racket the only way that she knows how. And where is Mother Courage in this scene towards the end of her story that is not a story? She is not there again. She is in the town trying to sell things. She is in the market. This time she comes back and she finds her child dead. And what does she do? She grieves, but she grieves by swallowing her grief. And she moves on. And the play ends with Mother Courage, who we now know is childless, but she doesn't know it, moving on. So this is brutal, and it's incredibly hard to watch. What is the audience meant to think about this? What is the audience meant to feel about this? Well, certainly in the way that Brecht not only wrote this play, but when he himself produced it as he did after the war in Berlin. He wanted productions to be alienating. The word for this kind of theatre is Verfremdung, which means an alienation, a distancing effect. You're not meant to feel bound up in the action. The action is deliberately broken up by scenes and songs. It is deliberately episodic. Mother Courage is not a character who is, to use that horrible modern phrase, relatable, because every time that you're drawn to relate to her as these terrible things happen, she just moves on and the situation moves on. There isn't time to develop a kind of affinity with her because the situation keeps changing. What does Brecht want his audience to see here? I think he wants them to see that there is no story to be told about these characters. There is only a story to be told about the situations. War is a situation. It is not a morality tale. It is not a tale of heroism. It is not a series of moral choices. It is a situation. What is the audience meant to feel when they see a mother bargaining for the life of her child and going in low, starting with a low bid and then raising it? Are they meant to condemn her? Are they meant to see her as a bad person, as a wicked person? Are they meant to pity her, to feel sorry for her? I think Brecht thinks they're meant to think, this is intolerable. Not Mother Courage is intolerable or Mother Courage is someone for whom we wish something different. But the situation itself, the possibilities of behavior here are unendurable and unsustainable. And yet these are human beings living through this. So this has to be sustained. This is, as well as the unpredictably predictable world, it's the unsustainably sustainable world. The thing that needs to change here are not the people and not their understanding of themselves. The only thing that needs to change is the setting itself, the fact of this kind of war. Mother Courage does, at various points in the play, sing songs that are kind of lessons. She tries to teach people lessons. She encounters all sorts of people on her travels, and she imparts to them her wisdom which is cynical and funny, and is often mocking them and their pretensions. In one of the most celebrated scenes in the play, she sings a song which is called The Great Song of Capitulation, which is her life lesson, which is it's never worth it. It's never worth thinking that this moment of anger will get you what you want. And she sings it to a young soldier who has come to complain to whoever the powers that be are in his situation about his intolerable treatment. He's furious about something that's happened to him. And Mother Courage is also furious about something that's happened to her. She thinks that the same people that the soldier is going to tell that they cannot treat him like this have also stiffed her in a deal. And she also wants to say to this particular fleeting group of authority figures, they can't behave like this. You can't do this. You can't be this kind of monster. And she says to the young soldier, but by the way, don't do it. It's not worth it. And the reason it's not worth it is your anger won't last. You won't be able to sustain it. The situation will be sustained. These people have a hold over you. And if the hold breaks, it won't be because you're free. It'll be because someone else has a hold over you. There will always be someone who has a hold over you. That's not going to change. There'll always be someone that you're trying to strike a bargain with. But your anger will burn itself out. It's a song and it's a speech that precedes the song, which is about the fact that we overstate the value of our own anger. And this is something that we should all recognize. This situation is intolerable. It's going to drive us all mad. We are going to be almost permanently furious, but we're not going to be able to sustain the fury because the fury will have a particular focus and that focus won't last. And so it sounds like a song of resignation. It sounds like a song that says, you know, in the end, we're the little people. There's nothing we can do. Let's sing a song of capitulation. Let's make it into a big joke. Let's cheer ourselves up by making it into a rousing tune, the rousing song of capitulation. And it's funny, but it's depressing. It feels defeatist. It's like saying, in the end, you've just got to keep your head down. And to say this in 1939, isn't that sort of what happened in Germany? Brecht is a great anti-fascist writer, but here he is saying, what can the little people do when the bastards are in charge? You might be angry about the way that they are now treating you, but your anger will burn itself out, so let it burn itself out. Just let these people do whatever it is that they have to do and keep your head down. Isn't that the reason why the Nazis got into and remained in power? And that is one way that you might read it, that this is an attack on complacency and a feeling that each individual is in it for themselves. But if it's an attack, it's an odd kind of attack because it is a rousing song in defense of that very attitude. But the other thing that you could say about it, Mother Courage doesn't say it because she never says anything that goes beyond the situation. The other thing you could say about it is that what's needed, therefore, is anger that lasts. And the only way that you can have anger that lasts is to be in a situation in which you can rely on the thought that your anger will still mean something tomorrow and the day after and the day after, because something about the situation will cohere. And therefore, the only way you can have anger that lasts is if you have sustainable or durable social solidarity. You need a setting in which people can believe that their anger is shared by other people who believe that their anger is shared by you. And that requires something other than war. It doesn't just require peace, it probably requires social justice. And that's what this play needs, if any of these lessons are going to be ones that can endure. But in the 30 Years' War, none of them can endure because none of that is possible. So we are meant to feel alienated from Mother Courage, maybe not alienated by her because she is a pretty attractive character. She draws you in because she's funny and because she sees through things. But we are not meant to feel that we are on a journey with her, not in the sense that people use that word to talk about emotional development. We are just on an endless, mindless, one thing after another trip through the killing fields, the bloodlands of Central Europe. But the problem with the play is that it is almost impossible not to feel for her, not to feel with her and for her. Her 3 children die. If Brecht didn't want us to feel with her and for her, he shouldn't be killing her children, particularly the final death, the death of Katrin, which is unbearable and is also heroic. I mean, if Brecht really wants us to stay alienated, don't give the mute child a heroic death trying to save the town and then have her mother find her body. And the struggle for Brecht with this play was to make it sufficiently watchable, engaging, compelling, funny, savage, but also alienating. And it's quite hard to square that circle. And he tried in his own productions to compensate for the fact that he thought earlier productions of the play had been too focused on encouraging audience empathy with Mother Courage. He tried to, and he did it with the actresses that he worked with, he tried to create that distance again. Too much distance and the audience will switch off. Too little distance and the audience will think they're on a moral journey in which their emotions are being tapped. There is some sweet spot between the two. I don't know if Brecht thought that he ever found it, but that's what this play is trying to achieve. A few years ago, in my job as a university teacher, I noticed that a word was changing its meaning in the way that students were using it. And I was really surprised by this. And I thought it was one of these generational things that I'd kind of missed. I'm too old. That people thought this word meant something that I didn't think it meant at all. And it really annoyed me. It would crop up in students' essays. And it was something that just sort of came from nowhere and suddenly was in all of these essays, like there was a social contagion at work. The word was poignant, which I thought meant sad and also playing on the heartstrings. And students kept using it in their essays about Hobbes, weirdly, and about Hobbes's description of the state of nature. That is, his description of the 30 Years' War, the war of all against all, this terrible situation in which there is the anarchy not of no rule and no order, but of too much rule and too much order, none of which can be believed in, none of which can be relied on. The terrible world that is full of lives that are nasty, brutish, and short. And students would say of the war of all against all that it was poignant. And I thought either something's gone wrong here and what they mean is something like pointed. I mean, it's sharp, it's painful, but it doesn't play on your heartstrings. It's much worse than that. You know, poignant is someone watching their love sail off to sea and not knowing if they're ever going to see them again. It's not genocide. Genocidal violence is not poignant. And yet, the more I thought about it, the more I thought, I think I know what they mean. I think probably they don't mean pointed. There is something heartrending about this. And what's heartrending about it is precisely that it's not just a free-for-all. It's not just banditry and violence and killing and death. It is people trying to create sustainable relationships in circumstances in which those relationships cannot be sustained. It is people trying to live under conditions in which nothing about life is secure. So these are people who are not giving up on everything. To live in such a world is to try to have a family. It is to try to care for your children. It is to try to teach them life lessons. It is to try to strike a good bargain. It's to try and make good investments, to buy the goods that you think the soldiers are going to need. It's to move on to the place where you think there is a better market for what you have to offer. It is to do the stuff of social life under conditions in which nothing can be relied on. And there is something heartrending about that, which is why there is something deeply poignant, not pointed, but poignant about Mother Courage. I think Brecht wanted this play to be pointed. Each scene doesn't make a point as such because the writing is so alive and the characters are so alive and the songs are so alive that each scene is its own slice of life. But what's sharp about it, what's pointed about it, is that it is so jagged. From scene to scene, there isn't a continuity to this. There isn't a sense that we're moving through. There is a sense that we are just being given this and then cut to next, cut to next, cut to next. Here is a life that has been broken down into this piece and this piece and this piece. This is a life that cannot cohere because this war has destroyed the possibility of coherent existence. So the play is meant to be sharp, jagged, pointed, alienating, not poignant. But it is poignant. It's unbearably poignant. I don't think Brecht has a leg to stand on because he wrote the damn thing to complain that his audiences feel too much for Mother Courage. And what is the poignancy here? It is the poignancy of the fact that these situations keep repeating themselves. It's the poignancy of repetition. Each situation is different. There are no lessons to be learned. There is no moral journey to be undertaken. There are no heroes. There are no stories here that will make us feel better about ourselves. There is just the war and the fight for survival. But the fight for survival is a series of scenes in which the same thing keeps happening. And the same thing that keeps happening is the thing that Mother Courage knows is going to happen. Because it is predictably unpredictable, which is, it is unreliable. Trust will be disappointed. Betrayal is just around the corner. No child can be kept alive. She knows this, so she knows the truth of her situation. And each time she encounters it, she has to discover it or learn it again, because each situation is different. That is the horror of this story. That is the poignancy of this story. This is a play that's set in a war that took place 300 years before the Second World War, which is the only war as horrific as the one that Brecht is writing about, in which Europe becomes a killing field. And yet, many of the situations described in Mother Courage are recognizable from wars around the world now. You could set Mother Courage in Gaza, you could set Mother Courage in Ukraine, and this would be familiar, and the play would work. And that's what makes it poignant. So it's not just that Mother Courage has to go through the scene over and over and over and over again and be unable to learn. It's that we, the people who are responsible for war, who live through war, we, the audience, the human audience, have gone through the situation over and over and over again. And we also, apparently, never learn. To find out more about this series and this podcast, please visit our new website, ppfideas.com. Tomorrow, the longest of all the fictions I'm talking about in this series, not the best, but one of the most interesting. Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged.